Yes, my paper is called Brackish Waters, Queer Temporalities and Utopia, and Michelle Cliff's NoTelephone to Heaven. It's okay if you haven't read the novel, but I highly recommend by the end that you do because I think it's incredible. Michelle Cliff's NoTelephone to Heaven presents a post-colonial Jamaica that is plagued by the afterlives of colonial violence. These structures persist as both history and as temporality, where the novel's present is fractured and overdetermined by the unresolved contradictions of colonial modernity. Claire Savage and Harry Harriet are two characters whose racial, national, and gendered liminality are not only inhabited by this fractured present, but are in fact produced by it. Their identities emerge within a space and time that demands legibility while simultaneously making that legibility an impossible task. In this way, the novel stages what Homi Bhabha calls time lag, a temporal disjunction where the present is continually split by the persistence of colonial histories that cannot be reconciled. Within this temporal structure, contradiction becomes untenable for these characters. Claire's position as a light-skinned Jamaican woman moving across competing racial frameworks in Jamaica, the US, and England never fully resolves into belonging. Her diasporic return is then framed as a search for origin, where nationalist and colonial logics require her to stabilize her identity in the form of choice. Harry Harriet similarly inhabits liminality at the level of gender, but actively resists these rigid categorizations. Described as, quote, boy-girl who is always strange, end quote, she is cast as a figure who exists outside of the colonial and heteronormative binaries, where others, quote, measure their normalness against his strangeness, end quote. Drawing upon Jose Esteban Munoz, Harry Harriet is best understood as a disidentificatory subject, one who neither assimilates into nor fully rejects this dominant ideology. Yet, this identification does not produce liberation within the novel's broader structure. Rather, it shows the limits of a system that cannot accommodate multiplicity. Munoz writes that for minoritarian subjects, quote, to find self within the dominant public sphere, we need to deny self, end quote. Harriet refuses this denial. Instead, she asserts, quote, no, darling, I was born this way. That I know, not just sun, but sun and moon, end quote, which recalls the fawn deity of Mawulisa. The beach encounter between Claire and Harry Harriet does not resolve these contradictions. Instead, it suspends the temporal logics that create them. In this moment, Claire and Harry Harriet inhabit a new and different mode of being, one that is not organized around choice, but around a distinctly queer and distinctly ecological mode of relation. I argue that this moment can be theorized as inhabiting what I call a brackish temporality, a form that emerges within ecological zones of mixture that allows liminal subjects to momentarily assert agency outside of the constraints of colonial modernity. Brackish temporality does not abolish time lag, nor does it provide an avenue to achieve utopia, but it momentarily suspends time and in the process creates a fleeting space where multiplicity can be fully inhabited. While Bhabha's formulation of time lag names the constitutive split within modernity, it does not, on its own terms, resolve the question of how such a fractured temporality might actually be inhabited otherwise. The present, in this framework, remains fractured and inescapable, leaving its subjects in a repeating temporal loop. This is something that Harry Harriet comments upon herself, stating that in Jamaica, quote, we are of the past here, a peculiar past, for we have taken the master's past as our own, end quote. By contrast, Munoz theorizes queerness as a utopian horizon, a not yet here that exists beyond the constraints of the present. For Munoz, moments of queer relationality allow subjects to glimpse what he calls ecstatic time, a break from the linear and heteronormative temporality that structures everyday life. Yet this formulation risks positioning utopia as elsewhere. It risks thinking of utopia as something to be reached rather than something that can be materially experienced in the present. I attempt to take these ideas together in order to analyze the intersectional subject positions of Claire and Harry Harriet, who are both impacted by the afterlife of colonialism and are both queer and gender expansive. When considered together, these two concepts form a tension. One names the inescapability of colonial temporality, while the other gestures towards a transcendence. What remains unconsidered is a mode of temporality that neither escapes the present nor remains wholly bound to it. It is within this tension that I locate brackish temporality as a brief suspension where the constraints of the present are loosened just enough to allow for a queer utopian relation. To theorize this temporal rupture, it is necessary to turn to the role of ecology. Brackish water is unstable. It forms when salt and fresh waters meet and create an environment of constant flux and negotiation. This inability is what allows life to flourish there. Organisms adapt, hybridize, and evolve through permeability. In brackish environments, purity and salinity are resisted. Life is instead sustained through mixture. This ecological condition provides the material framework for understanding the kind of temporality that Cliff stages in her beach encounter. As Astrida Nemonsis writes, embodiment itself is watery. We exist within, quote, complex fluid circulation where bodies are sites of ongoing exchange. Water traverses boundaries and carries histories across time and space. Similarly, Stacy Alaimo's concept of transcorporeality describes a, quote, time-space where human corporeality is inseparable from nature or environment, end quote, emphasizing that both human bodies are always already entangled with the more than human world. Both of these ideas displace the notion of the self as autonomous, instead staging a relationality where bodies and environments are mutually constitutive. This relationality is central to Edouard Glissant's Poetics of Relation, where he conceptualizes the figure of the rhizome and, crucially, the mangrove as models for thinking relation in the Caribbean. Unlike the rooted tree, the mangrove grows laterally, extending outward through a network of interconnected roots that exist above and below water, thriving in brackish environments. This concept is taken up and reworked by Omoseke Natasha Tinsley, whose reading of No Telephone to Heaven foregrounds the mangrove as a site of queer erotic possibility. For Tinsley, the mangrove is a space of erotic relation between two women where desire emerges outside of the constraints of heteronormative and colonial logics. The mangrove's dense and entangled roots then become the materialization of queer temporality and provides an environment where bodies can encounter one another outside of normative spaces. Cliff's beach encounter can best be understood as an extension of this mangrove ecology. The scene is first saturated with sensory detail while the characters spend the day at a beach in a nearby mangrove. Quote, the green coconuts, shot clean between the fronds, rained around them, thumping and rolling on the sand. Harry Harriet sliced two open with his cutlass, and they poured rum into the sweet water, the mixture dribbling over them. This was but the beginning. Soon they would be covered with the mango juice, salt water, and the spicy oil of the meat. Resting from riding the breakers, warmed by their feast in the sun, they lay side by side under a sky thrilling in its brightness, touching gently, kissing, tongues entwined, coming to, laughing. End of quote. These details produce sensuous ecology where bodies and environments become fully enmeshed with one another. This moment exemplifies what Munoz describes as, quote, stepping out of the linearity of straight time, end quote, where the ordinary temporality of oppression and repetition is momentarily suspended. This is just the beginning, does not only denote the beginning of the joy-filled day of leisure, but also a gesture towards the beginning of what could be. In a way, Harry Harriet and Claire's connection at the beach steps out of time and towards something novel altogether. Their bodies, marked by history and colonial violence, become bearers of this utopian potential. Their laughter and touch are private pleasures, and as Munoz writes, quote, moments of queer relational bliss that rewrite the larger map of everyday life, end quote. This is ecstatic time. Cliff's choice to relocate this scene in a reappropriated beach amplifies its ecological and utopian charge. The beach becomes a temporality, a queer ecological space that, even if only briefly, the characters live outside the reality of colonial modernity and can embody a different way of being in time. Importantly, this is not an attempt to escape history. The colonial past remains, embedded within the landscape of the mangrove, but its structuring force is temporarily suspended. This is the doing of queerness that Munoz insists upon, where Harry, Harriet, and Claire are reaching toward the not yet here and the potential of utopia. It is here that brackish temporality emerges most clearly as a form of agency. In the novel, agency is aligned with choice. That is, the ability to choose between predetermined options. But as the novel demonstrates, such choices are structured by the same systems they appear to subvert. Brackish temporality, by contrast, interrupts, if momentarily, the demand for choice altogether. Agency is thus located in the capacity to inhabit a queer multiplicity without needing to resolve it. This is a subtle but profound shift. It redefines agency as something that is, in fact, relational. This moment is necessarily fleeting. The beach functions as a liminal, almost sacred site, a threshold between land and sea, their past and their future. Yet as the moment draws to a close, both characters are taken out of this ecstatic temporality and return to the demands of the world. Harry Harriet invokes a choice that must be made. Quote, the time will come for both of us to choose, for we will have to make the choice, cast our lot, Can't live split, not in this world, end quote. This proclamation signals a re-entry into a linear colonial time that actively demands fixity and legibility within its prescribed frameworks. In this world, ambiguity is punished. Harry Harriet's words are heavy with resignation to this choice. The necessity to cast our lot points to the way that dominant systems of race and gender violently enforce boundaries, insisting on a single stable identity as a condition for survival. The return to linear temporality is marked by the reassertion of the possibility of living split. The impossibility of living split. The structures of colonial modernity reimpose themselves and the space of brackish temporality collapses. Yet this collapse does not negate the significance of the moment. On the contrary, it ultimately clarifies what is at stake: the impossibility of sustaining brackish temporality and the violence of a system that cannot hold multiplicity. At the same time, the very existence of the moment demonstrates that alternative modes of being are imaginable and can be experienced materially. In this way, the beach encounter does not offer a utopia in the traditional sense of a fully realized alternative world, but rather it aligns with Munoz's conception of utopia as a horizon, a not yet here that is glimpsed in moments of rupture. Brackish temporality names this mode of glimpsing and the more than human world that enables it so. By thinking through this, we are able to understand the gravity of what Cliff set out to accomplish with the beach encounter as an ecological and temporal experiment. The mangrove, as conceptualized by Glissant and Tinsley, becomes a method and a way of thinking about temporality outside of the logics of choice or legibility. In this brackish space, Claire and Harriet do not overcome their liminality, but instead inhabit it otherwise. By suspending the temporal structure that weighs their existence, they are able to glimpse a mode of being that is not fully possible. Brackishness then becomes a condition of possibility and names an ecological and temporal condition where embodiment can emerge from instability and where utopia can be momentarily felt. Thank you.